What begins as a curious discovery by a farmer's loyal border collie during a violent thunderstorm quickly escalates into a high-stakes federal investigation that not only transforms his debt-ridden Ohio property into the focal point of national security interest, but also uncovers long-buried secrets that rewrite the history of America's hidden defense network and his own family legacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Michael Johnston had always believed in the value of persistence and hard work. His 75-acre Pinewood Valley Farm, nestled in the gently rolling countryside of rural Ohio, had been in his family for 3 generations, each furrow and fence post representing decades of sweat and determination. The maple grove along the northern boundary still carried the initials his grandfather Harold had carved as a young man. And the creek that meandered through the eastern fields still ran clear with the same waters that had nourished Johnston, crops since before Mike was born. The weathered red barn, standing proudly since the 1940s, had witnessed the farm's glory days when Harold Johnston's corn took blue ribbons at the state fair and his dairy operation supplied 3 counties. Those memories seemed increasingly distant now, as Mike faced challenges his grandfather could never have imagined. The last 4 growing seasons had brought nothing but heartache and financial strain to Pinewood Valley Farm. Climate change had transformed the once predictable Ohio weather patterns into a farmer's nightmare. 2 years ago, a devastating drought had withered his corn crop before it could reach maturity. Last season, bizarrely timed hailstorms had destroyed nearly half his soybean fields just weeks before harvest. Insurance covered a fraction of the losses, and the farming methods that had served the Johnston family for generations seemed increasingly inadequate against these new meteorological realities. The financial pressure had become almost unbearable. Mike's desk drawer contained a growing stack of notices from Mapleton Community Bank, each letter more formal and threatening than the last. The equipment loan he had taken out 3 years ago to replace their aging tractor now loomed over him like a guillotine blade. At 54, Mike faced the very real possibility of being the Johnston who finally lost the family land, a prospect that kept him awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling of the same farmhouse bedroom where he'd slept as a boy. The local farmers market in Mapleton, where his family had once proudly displayed their abundant harvests, now felt like hostile territory. Regular customers had gradually disappeared, forced to find other suppliers as Pinewood Valley's yields became unpredictable. Stands that had once eagerly purchased Johnston produce now bought from the newer, technology-driven operations that had sprung up across the county, farms backed by corporate money and equipped with the latest irrigation systems that Mike couldn't afford. Mike's steadfast companion through these difficult times was Cooper, a 5-year-old border collie with intelligent eyes that sometimes made Mike wonder if the dog understood more about their situation than he let on. During the toughest days, when the weight of potential failure felt crushing, Cooper would press his warm body against Mike's leg, those keen brown eyes offering silent solidarity. The dog had become much more than a working animal. He was a loyal friend who seemed to intuitively share both the hardships of the farm's decline and the dwindling hope for its recovery. But lately, Cooper's behavior had changed in puzzling ways. Instead of following Mike around the property during daily chores as he normally did, the dog had developed an unusual fixation with the southwestern field, a problematic area near the creek that had always been difficult to cultivate due to its rocky soil. For days now, Cooper would disappear for hours, returning to the farmhouse with mud-caked paws and an intensity in his eyes that Mike had never seen before. When Mike would investigate, he'd find freshly dug holes scattered across that same section of land, as if Cooper was searching for something specific. Mike initially chalked it up to typical dog behavior. Perhaps Cooper had detected a groundhog burrow or caught the scent of foxes. But the dog's persistence and the almost methodical pattern of his digging suggested something different. Whenever Mike called him away from the area, Cooper would reluctantly obey, but his body language conveyed unmistakable frustration, as if Mike were interrupting vital work. The farm's decline had sent ripples through the entire community. Pinewood Valley had once been a cornerstone of the local agricultural economy, providing seasonal employment during harvest and supplying produce to restaurants and markets throughout the county. Now Mike could barely maintain basic operations, let alone hire extra hands. Even the equipment dealership in Mapleton, where his father had once purchased machinery with confident handshakes, now politely declined his requests for parts on credit. The regulars at Judy's diner would exchange knowing glances when Mike entered, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and resignation. They remembered when his grandfather would arrive with fresh produce for the kitchen, how his father had mentored younger farmers in soil conservation techniques. To them, watching Pinewood Valley's slow decline was like witnessing the end of an era, another family farm being crushed under the weight of modern agricultural economics. Sarah Williams, the county's agricultural extension agent, who had grown up just 2 farms over from the Johnstons, still stopped by regularly with coffee and practical advice. She seemed to be the last person who genuinely believed the farm could be saved. "This land knows your family, Mike," she'd remind him during particularly difficult conversations. "Johnston's soil doesn't give up easily. Neither should you." But even Sarah's unwavering support couldn't change the harsh financial reality. The last harvest had barely covered operating expenses, let alone made any impact on his mounting debt. The ancient irrigation system that had reliably served these fields for decades now failed more often than it worked. Parts were increasingly difficult and expensive to source, yet purchasing a new system remained financially impossible. Mike had reluctantly started taking on carpentry jobs in neighboring towns to generate additional income. Each day spent away from the farm felt like a betrayal of his heritage, yet the alternative, losing the land entirely, was unthinkable. The Regional Agricultural Development Office had recommended transitioning to specialized organic crops with higher profit margins. But the certification process and specialized equipment required substantial upfront investment. Money Mike simply didn't have. What Mike couldn't possibly know was that Cooper's strange behavior had nothing to do with wildlife or buried bones. The dog had sensed something beneath the Earth's surface, something that had remained hidden for decades, something that would soon upend Mike's life in ways he couldn't imagine. As another evening settled over the struggling farm, Mike sat on the weathered porch steps, absently scratching behind Cooper's ears while watching dark storm clouds gather on the horizon. The Weather Service had issued severe thunderstorm warnings for their county, predicting rainfall amounts that could further complicate his already precarious situation. Several fields had only recently been planted, and heavy rains could wash away both seeds and what remained of his financial resources. Cooper suddenly perked up, his attention once again drawn to that same southwestern section of the property. Before Mike could react, the dog bolted across the yard, disappearing into the lengthening shadows. "Cooper, get back here!" Mike called, knowing a severe storm was approaching, but the dog had already vanished from sight. Mike sighed deeply and rose from the steps. He needed to secure the barn and equipment before the storm hit, and now he had to track down his suddenly disobedient dog as well. As he walked toward the equipment shed, the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly intensifying into a heavy downpour that forced him to run the remaining distance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By the time Mike had secured the farm equipment and closed up the vulnerable buildings, the storm had escalated into something more severe than predicted. Lightning split the darkened sky in jagged bursts, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old farmhouse. The rain fell in sheets so dense that visibility was reduced to mere yards. Mike stood in the barn doorway, calling for Cooper repeatedly, his voice barely audible above the storm's fury. Concern grew with each passing minute. The southwestern section of his property included a low-lying area that could flood rapidly. During heavy rainfall, after waiting another 10 minutes with no sign of the dog, Mike pulled on his heaviest rain gear and grabbed a flashlight. Despite the danger, he couldn't leave Cooper out in such conditions. He headed out into the storm, the powerful wind threatening to knock him off balance with each step. The journey to the southwestern field took twice as long as usual, with Mike fighting against mud-slicked slopes and near-horizontal rain. When he finally approached the area where Cooper had been digging, the beam of his flashlight caught the reflection of the dog's eyes. Cooper was standing at the edge of what appeared to be a freshly collapsed section of earth, barking with unusual urgency. "Cooper, here, boy!" Mike shouted above the storm, but the dog remained fixed in position, continuing his insistent barking while occasionally pawing at the muddy ground. As Mike drew closer, he noticed something unnatural protruding from the rain-soaked earth, something with straight edges and an unusual metallic glint that couldn't possibly be a natural formation. The heavy rainfall had apparently washed away enough soil to reveal whatever object Cooper had been so determined to uncover. Mike directed his flashlight beam at the exposed section and felt his heart skip a beat. Partially visible in the muddy collapse was what appeared to be a corner of a metal container, something manufactured and deliberately buried. It wasn't some natural rock formation or old farm equipment. The visible portion had a distinctly industrial appearance, with what looked like specialized fastening mechanisms. "What the hell?" Mike murmured, momentarily forgetting the raging storm around them. Cooper whined and pawed at the ground near the object, seemingly vindicated that his human finally understood the importance of his discovery. Mike knelt despite the pouring rain and began carefully clearing away some of the mud and debris from around the exposed corner. The more soil he removed, the more certain he became that this was no ordinary container. It appeared to be a specialized storage unit, roughly the size of a large footlocker, constructed of what felt like heavy-gauge metal with unusual features along its edges. The rain was falling too heavily, and the light too poor to properly investigate further. Whatever this object was, it had clearly been deliberately buried, and judging by the depth of soil that had covered it until the storm's erosion, it had been there for quite some time. "Come on, boy," Mike said, giving Cooper an appreciative pat. "We'll come back when this storm passes." But Cooper refused to budge, continuing to bark at the partially revealed container as if it might disappear if left unattended. Mike pulled his phone from his pocket, shielding it from the rain as best he could, and took several photos of the exposed object. As lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene momentarily better than his flashlight, he noticed something that made him pause. What appeared to be faded markings or symbols on the visible portion of the container. After several more failed attempts to convince Cooper to return to the house, Mike finally had to physically lift the medium-sized dog and carry him part-way before the animal reluctantly agreed to follow him back. The storm continued throughout the night, its intensity undiminished until the early morning hours. Mike slept fitfully, his mind returning repeatedly to the mysterious object. Cooper remained unusually alert, positioned by the front door as if eager to return to his discovery at the first opportunity. By dawn, the storm had finally moved on, leaving behind a landscape transformed by its fury. Fields that had been dry the previous day now contained standing water in low-lying areas. The creek had swollen beyond its banks, and several sections of the property showed signs of significant erosion. Mike barely took time for coffee before heading back to the southwestern field with Cooper leading the way, moving with confident purpose as if following an invisible trail. When they reached the site, Mike was surprised to find that the overnight rainfall had exposed significantly more of the container. What had been just a corner was now nearly half visible, having been further uncovered as rainwater continued to wash away the surrounding soil. In the clear morning light, Mike could now see that the object was indeed a specialized metal box with unusual security features. It had a distinctive military-industrial appearance with reinforced corners and what looked like environmental seals around its edges. Most notably, now visible on its surface were faded but unmistakable markings, including what appeared to be a partial government classification stamp and alphanumeric codes unlike anything Mike had encountered in civilian life. Mike carefully photographed the exposed portion from multiple angles before beginning to carefully remove more of the surrounding soil. As he worked, Cooper remained close by, occasionally assisting by pawing away loose dirt, his excitement evident in his wagging tail and alert posture. After nearly an hour of careful excavation, Mike had exposed enough of the container to confirm his growing suspicion that this was no ordinary find. The box featured sophisticated locking mechanisms and environmental seals consistent with high-security government storage. Though weathered by years underground, the construction was clearly designed for extremely long-term preservation of its contents. Most concerning were the visible security classifications and handling instructions partially visible on its surface. Though faded, Mike recognized enough military terminology from his 2 years in the Army Reserves to understand that whatever this container held had once been considered highly sensitive material. As he sat back on his heels, considering his next steps, Mike's phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's name. "Hey, Sarah," he answered, trying to keep his voice casual despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Mike, I was just checking in after that monster storm. How bad is the damage?" Her voice carried genuine concern. Mike hesitated, unsure whether to mention his discovery. "The creek flooded worse than I've ever seen, and there's standing water in the lower fields, but the house and barn held up okay. Actually, though, I found something strange. Cooper's been digging in the southwestern field for days, and the storm washed away enough soil to reveal what he was after. It's some kind of specialized metal container with government markings." The line went silent for a moment before Sarah responded. "What kind of government markings?" "That's the thing. They look military, maybe classified. There are security seals and lock mechanisms, unlike anything I've seen in civilian use." Another pause. "Mike, have you fully uncovered it or tried to open it?" "No, just exposed enough to see what it is. It's still partially buried." "Good. Listen to me carefully." Sarah's tone had changed completely now, deadly serious. "Don't touch it further, don't try to open it, and don't tell anyone else about it yet. I know someone who works with the State Environmental Office. They deal with all kinds of unexpected findings on private land. Let me make a call, and I'll get back to you within the hour." Mike agreed, though he felt a strange reluctance to step away from the discovery. After ending the call, he took a few more photographs, then reluctantly headed back to the farmhouse with Cooper to wait for Sarah's return call. The dog seemed equally reluctant to leave, looking back repeatedly at the partially excavated container. While waiting, Mike searched online for any information about government containers similar to what he'd found. His brief research yielded little specific information, but enough general context to increase his concern. Similar containers had occasionally been discovered on former military properties, sometimes containing decades-old classified materials or environmental monitoring equipment. 40 minutes later, Sarah called back, her voice still carrying that same edge of urgency. "Mike, my contact says you need to secure the area immediately. Don't disturb the container further. They're sending a preliminary assessment team that should arrive within a few hours." "Assessment team? Sarah, what's going on?" I'm not entirely sure, but apparently the description and location raised immediate flags. The markings you described match certain protocols that trigger automatic evaluation procedures. She paused. Mike, this might be important, really important. The team they're sending, it's not just state environmental people. Before Mike could ask for clarification, Sarah promised to come directly to the farm and ended the call. True to her word, Sarah's car appeared in his driveway less than 30 minutes later. As she stepped out, Mike noticed she looked uncharacteristically concerned, her usually calm demeanor replaced with visible tension. "What exactly did you tell them?" Mike asked as they walked toward the kitchen. "Just what you told me. The location, the approximate size, and your description of the markings and security features. I sent them the photographs you texted me." She accepted the coffee Mike offered. "Mike, my contact called me back almost immediately after forwarding your information. Whatever this is, it triggered protocols way above his pay grade. The team coming isn't just routine investigators. They're specialists in unexploded ordnance and hazardous materials." Mike nearly dropped his mug. "You think it's a bomb or toxic waste?" "I don't know, but my contact was clearly rattled by the response his report generated. He said the coordinates of your farm were immediately cross-referenced with some restricted database, and that's when everything escalated." They spent the next hour speculating while Cooper paced restlessly by the door, clearly wanting to return to the site. Sarah had just suggested they prepare some lunch when the sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention to the window. What Mike saw made his stomach tighten with apprehension. 3 unmarked black SUVs and a specialized truck with government plates were coming up his long driveway, moving with deliberate purpose. "That was fast," Sarah murmured. "Too fast for regular state officials responding to a routine call." As the vehicles came to a stop in front of the farmhouse, 8 individuals emerged. 4 wore specialized protective equipment and carried scientific instruments, while the others were dressed in plain, dark clothing but moved with the unmistakable discipline and alertness of law enforcement. One man approached the front door and knocked firmly. When Mike opened it, the man immediately presented credentials, identifying him as Special Agent David Thornton with the FBI. "Mr. Johnston, I understand you've discovered an unusual object on your property. We'd like you to show us exactly where it's located, please." Mike exchanged a quick glance with Sarah before nodding. "It's near the southwestern boundary, about a quarter mile from here." "And you haven't attempted to open or move this container?" the agent asked, his expression revealing nothing. "No, I just uncovered enough to see what it was," then called. "Sarah here, who contacted authorities." Agent Thornton nodded. "Good, that was the correct decision. Now, if you'll lead us to the site." As they walked toward the discovery location, with Cooper eagerly leading the way, Mike couldn't help but notice the efficiency with which the team operated. They communicated minimally, but moved in perfect coordination, setting up a perimeter around the area before they had even seen the container. When they reached the site, the 4 technical specialists immediately deployed various scanning devices, while the other agents established a wider security boundary. Agent Thornton instructed Mike and Sarah to remain at a specific distance while the assessment was conducted. One technician passed what looked like a sophisticated metal detector over and around the partially exposed container, while another used what appeared to be a radiation detection device. A third operated a tablet-connected scanner that created detailed imaging of the container and surrounding soil. After nearly 30 minutes of careful analysis, the technical team conferred briefly before one of them approached Agent Thornton. Their conversation was conducted in low tones that Mike couldn't overhear, but he clearly saw the agent's expression change from professional neutrality to intense interest. Agent Thornton then approached Mike and Sarah, his demeanor now noticeably different. "Mr. Johnston, we need to establish a secure perimeter around this entire section of your property. Based on initial findings, this container appears to be of significant government interest. potentially dating back several decades. What exactly is it? Mike asked. I'm not at liberty to speculate at this time, the agent replied carefully. However, I can tell you that the markings and security features match certain highly classified storage protocols from a specific period in American history. We need to bring in a specialized recovery team to properly extract and secure the container. How long will that take? Mike asked, glancing at his fields that needed attention after the storm. The advanced team is already en route and should arrive within the hour. The full extraction process may take 24 to 48 hours, during which we'll need to restrict access to this portion of your property. Agent Thornton paused. Mr. Johnston, I understand this is an inconvenience, but I must emphasize the potential importance of this discovery. Depending on what we find, there may be significant national security implications. As if sensing that the conversation was about his discovery, Cooper moved closer to Mike, tail wagging slowly as he looked between his owner and the partially excavated container that had so captured his attention for days. Agent Thornton noticed the dog's behavior. Is this the animal that found the container? Mike nodded. Yes, he's been digging in this area for almost a week. The storm finally washed away enough soil for me to see what he was after. The agent studied Cooper with newfound interest. Interesting. We've documented cases where certain animals can detect subtle electromagnetic signatures or material compounds that humans can't perceive. He reached down to briefly pat Cooper's head. Good work, boy. Within the hour, as promised, additional vehicles arrived, these with clear government and military markings. A specialized mobile command center was established at the edge of Mike's property, complete with satellite communications equipment and expanded security perimeters. As Mike and Sarah watched from the farmhouse porch, the area around the discovery transformed into something resembling a military operation, with specialized equipment, security checkpoints, and dozens of personnel working with disciplined efficiency. What did your dog find, Mike? Sarah whispered, the scale of the response indicating that this was far more significant than either of them had initially imagined. Mike shook his head slowly, watching as Cooper continued to observe the activity from his position on the porch, the dog's intelligent eyes tracking the movements of the various specialists now surrounding his discovery. I don't know, Mike replied quietly, but I have a feeling our lives are about to change in ways we can't possibly predict. The morning after the FBI's arrival dawned with an almost surreal quality. Mike stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the now bustling operation that had materialized overnight on his struggling farm. Where yesterday there had been only overgrown fields and financial worry, today there was a coordinated federal presence that transformed his property into something unrecognizable. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been how to make the next loan payment. Now government vehicles lined his driveway, specialized equipment hummed day and night, and his southwestern field had been converted into what looked like a military excavation site, complete with portable floodlights, specialized tents, and a rotating security detail. What struck Mike most profoundly was the contrast between his years of silent struggle and the sudden, overwhelming resources now focused on his land. A team of what must have been 20 specialists worked with methodical precision around the mysterious container Cooper had discovered, their equipment alone probably worth more than his entire farm. They've been working all night, Sarah commented, joining Mike on the porch. She had stayed at the farmhouse both for moral support and out of her own growing curiosity about the unfolding situation. I know. I could see the lights from my bedroom window. Never thought I'd see a day when I couldn't sleep because there was too much activity on this farm, rather than too much worry. Mike took a sip of his coffee, watching as Cooper observed the proceedings. with unusual intensity from his position at the bottom of the porch steps. Agent Thornton emerged from one of the temporary structures and, spotting Mike, began walking toward the farmhouse. His expression remained professionally neutral, but there was a new energy in his stride that hadn't been present the previous. "Evening, Mr. Johnston," he called as he approached. "We've made significant progress overnight. The container has been fully excavated, though we haven't yet opened it. Our preliminary analysis confirmed it's a specialized document storage unit with environmental protection systems designed specifically for long-term preservation of sensitive materials." "What kind of sensitive materials?" Mike asked. The agent hesitated briefly. "Based on the classification markings and security features, it appears to be what we call a Cerberus containment system, a specific type of storage used exclusively for intelligence materials during a particular Cold War operation." "Cold War?" Mike echoed, trying to process how something from that era had ended up buried on his family's farm. "That would have been during my grandfather's time." "Precisely," Agent Thornton nodded. "According to our records, this land has been in your family since the 1940s. Was your grandfather Harold Johnston?" The question caught Mike off guard. "Yes. He ran the farm until my father took over in the mid-80s. How did you know that?" Instead of answering directly, Thornton pulled out a tablet and showed Mike a document that had been scanned into the system. A black and white photograph of a much younger Harold Johnston standing beside a man in military uniform. "Is this your grandfather?" the agent asked. Mike stared at the image, stunned by the unexpected glimpse into his family's past. "Yes, that's him, but I don't recognize the military officer, and I've never seen this photograph before. The other man is Colonel James Whitfield, who ran several classified intelligence operations during the early Cold War period. This photograph was in sealed archives, Mr. Johnston, part of files that remained classified until just 10 years ago." Mike felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. His grandfather, a man he remembered as a straightforward farmer with calloused hands and practical wisdom, standing alongside a high-ranking intelligence officer. It didn't align with any family stories he'd ever heard. "I don't understand," Mike said finally. "My grandfather was just a farmer. He never mentioned any military connections or government work." Agent Thornton's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Johnston, during the Cold War, many ordinary Americans with strategic property or specific skills were recruited for classified operations without their families ever knowing. Their contributions remained secret for decades. Some still. Wait," Sarah, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Are you saying Mike's grandfather was some kind of spy?" "Not exactly," Thornton replied. "Based on the limited information I'm cleared to access, Harold Johnston appears to have been what we called a silent partner, a civilian who provided crucial support to intelligence operations, often by offering remote properties for secure storage or as meeting locations." Mike's mind raced as he tried to reconcile this new information with the grandfather he thought he knew. "And you think this container has something to do with whatever role my grandfather played?" "We believe so. The serial numbers and security codes match a specific operation from 1957 to 1961, a particularly tense period of the Cold War. The containment system was designed to preserve documents and microfilm for at least 75 years in underground conditions." The implications of what the agent was saying slowly sank in. Mike's quiet family farm, passed down through generations as a simple agricultural operation, had apparently served another purpose entirely during his grandfather's time, one connected to national security and Cold War intelligence. "When will you open it?" Mike asked. "A specialized team is arriving this afternoon with the proper authorization codes and equipment." Thornton explained. "These containers have multiple security systems that need to be properly disarmed. Once they confirm the contents aren't hazardous, we'll proceed with documentation and analysis." As the agent returned to the excavation site, Mike remained on the porch, trying to process this unexpected revelation about his family history. Cooper, sensing his owner's confusion, moved closer and rested his head on Mike's knee. "Did you somehow know about this?" Mike asked the dog, half joking but still amazed at how Cooper had led him directly to a buried piece of history that might otherwise have remained hidden forever. Sarah placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. "Your grandfather must have had his reasons for keeping this secret, Mike. Many people who served during that era took their classified work to the grave, believing it was their patriotic duty to remain silent. But why would he agree to have something this important buried on our land? What if it had been accidentally uncovered during normal farming? What if it contained something dangerous?" From what Agent Thornton said, your grandfather was trusted by very high-level officials. Whatever's in that container, he must have believed it was worth protecting. Sarah paused, studying Mike's troubled expression. "You know, this doesn't change who your grandfather was. It just adds another dimension to the man you knew." Mike nodded slowly, his gaze returning to the bustling activity around the excavation site. "I just can't help wondering what else I might not know about my own family, my own land." Throughout the morning, more specialized vehicles arrived, bringing additional equipment and personnel. Mike watched as a helicopter briefly touched down in his eastern field, dropping off what appeared to be high-ranking officials before departing. Again, the scale of the operation continued to expand, with the security perimeter widening and communications equipment becoming increasingly sophisticated. Shortly after noon, Agent Thornton returned to the farmhouse, accompanied by an older woman in civilian clothes whose bearing suggested military background. "Mr. Johnston, this is Director Rachel Martinez from the Historical Preservation Division of the National Security Council. She'd like to speak with you privately." Director Martinez extended her hand with a warm smile that contrasted with her otherwise formal demeanor. "Mr. Johnston, thank you for your cooperation during what must be a very confusing situation. Perhaps we could talk inside?" Once seated at Mike's kitchen table, Director Martinez got straight to the point. "Mr. Johnston, I've been authorized to share certain classified information with you regarding your grandfather's service to this country and the nature of what we believe is contained in the storage unit discovered on your property." She placed a folder marked "Confidential" on the table. In 1957, during a period of heightened tensions with the Soviet Union, your grandfather was approached because of his farm's strategic location and his reputation for absolute discretion. He agreed to assist in a specialized document preservation program called Operation Guardian Echo. Mike listened in astonishment as Martinez explained that Operation Guardian Echo had been designed to preserve critical intelligence and historical documentation that might be lost in the event of a catastrophic conflict with the Soviet Union. Selected civilian properties across the United States had been used to hide specialized containers with materials deemed too sensitive for standard archival storage, but too historically important to risk losing. Your grandfather was one of only 14 civilians nationwide entrusted with preserving what we called Cerberus containers, specialized storage units containing intelligence that couldn't be kept in government facilities because of its particularly sensitive nature. "What exactly is in the container?" Mike asked, still struggling to reconcile this new information with his understanding of his family history. "Based on the identification codes, we believe it contains documentation related to a specific intelligence operation called Windfall, a network of deep cover assets that operated inside the Soviet Union from 1951 to 1960. If we are correct, these documents could significantly alter our understanding of several key historical events from that period. Mike shook his head, in disbelief. And my grandfather kept this secret his entire life. He never told my father or anyone else in the family. That was the nature of his agreement, Martinez explained. The civilians selected for Operation Guardian Echo were chosen specifically for their ability to maintain absolute secrecy, even from their families. Your grandfather understood that knowledge of these locations could put his loved ones at risk. What happens now? The specialized team will open the container this afternoon. Given your family's role in preserving these materials, I've received authorization for you to be present when we examine the contents, provided you sign these confidentiality agreements. Martinez slid several documents across the table. Mike glanced through the papers, noting the severe penalties for disclosure of classified information. Do I have a choice? Of course, Martinez assured him. You're under no obligation, but I thought you might want to understand the full extent of your grandfather's contribution to national security. After a moment's hesitation, Mike signed. The documents, whatever was in that container, he needed to know how it connected to his family's history. As promised, the specialized team arrived by mid-afternoon, 4 individuals in unmarked vehicles who moved with the practiced efficiency of those accustomed to handling sensitive operations. They carried equipment cases bearing no identification, but which clearly contained sophisticated technical devices. Agent Thornton escorted Mike to the excavation site, where the container had been fully extracted and placed on a specialized platform. Now fully visible, the box appeared even more impressive than Mike had initially realized. A sleek, reinforced metal case, approximately 4 feet long by 2 feet wide, with multiple locking mechanisms and environmental seals. The container has several security systems, Thornton explained as they approached. Physical locks, coded sequences, and biometric verifications that were cutting edge for the 1950s. The preservation system inside was designed to maintain stable conditions for up to a century. The 4 specialists worked methodically, first scanning the container with various devices, then beginning the process of disarming its security features. Mike watched in fascination as they referenced specialized manuals and cross-checked security codes, working through what appeared to be a complex unlocking sequence. Remarkable condition, one technician commented. The environmental seals are still intact. Whoever sited this location chose well. No groundwater intrusion, stable temperature gradient. After nearly 40 minutes of careful work, the team leader announced they were ready for the final unlocking sequence. A hush fell over the assembled officials as the last security measures were disarmed, culminating in a series of audible clicks as multiple bolts retracted. Container secure, ready for opening, the lead technician announced. Director Martinez stepped forward. Proceed. With ceremonial precision, the team lifted the container's lid, revealing an interior compartment lined with specialized preservation materials. Inside were several sealed metal cases, each bearing additional security markings and what appeared to be document codes. The lead technician carefully lifted out the first case, placing it on a sterile surface where another specialist began the process of opening it. Inside were perfectly preserved documents and what appeared to be rolls of microfilm, each in its own protective sleeve. As the specialists began carefully cataloging the materials, Director Martinez moved closer to Mike. Your grandfather protected these materials for decades without ever knowing their specific content. That level of trust and commitment is extraordinarily rare, Mr. Johnston. Mike watched as more document cases were removed from the container, each handled with reverence by the specialists. What will happen to these materials now? They'll be transported to a secure facility for proper analysis and historical review, Based on what we're seeing, these appear to be complete operational records for an intelligence network that shaped critical events during the Cold War. Their historical significance cannot be overstated. One of the specialists approached Martinez, speaking in hushed tones while showing her a specific document. The director's expression changed from professional interest to visible surprise. "Mr. Johnston," Martinez said after the specialist returned to his work, "it appears your grandfather's role was even more significant than our records indicated. Among these documents is a personal letter addressed to him from the Director of Intelligence Operations, thanking him for services beyond simply providing secure storage." "What kind of services?" Mike asked. "The letter suggests your grandfather may have served as an emergency contact point for deep cover operatives, a role that would have required exceptional discretion and courage. The letter specifically mentions his unwavering resolve during the Berlin crisis, which would have been the Berlin crisis of 1961. Mike felt as if he were hearing about a stranger rather than the grandfather who had taught him to farm, to respect the land, to value honesty and hard work above all else. Yet somehow, these revelations didn't contradict the man he had known. They simply added depths he had never imagined. As the sun began to set, the documentation process continued under powerful portable lights. Mike had remained at the site for hours, watching as history was literally unpacked before his eyes. Cooper had stayed close by, unusually calm, as he observed the proceedings with what almost seemed like satisfaction. Agent Thornton approached, offering Mike a cup of coffee from the mobile command center. "Your dog hasn't left the site all day," he observed. "Quite remarkable how he found this container in the first place." Mike nodded, absently patting Cooper's head. "He knew something important was here. I just didn't understand what he was trying to tell me." "Animals often perceive things we miss," Thornton said. "We've documented cases where specialized detection dogs have located objects buried for decades. Something about this container, perhaps trace elements in the metal or subtle electromagnetic signatures from the preservation systems, must have registered with him." As darkness fell completely, Director Martinez called Mike over to where the specialists had set up an impromptu review station. "Mr. Johnston, we've made a preliminary assessment of these materials, and I've received authorization to share something with you that I believe you should see." She handed Mike a black and white photograph that had been carefully removed from one of the document cases. The image showed Harold Johnston again, this time standing with 3 other men near what Mike recognized as the old corn silo that had been demolished in the 1970s. "This photograph was taken in 1960, Martinez explained. "The man on the left is a high-ranking intelligence officer. The other 2 men were Soviet diplomats who had secretly arranged to provide critical information about missile deployments, information that helped prevent a potential nuclear confrontation." Mike stared at the photograph, a physical connection to a side of his grandfather he had never known existed. "My grandfather hosted Soviet officials here during the height of the Cold War. According to these documents, your farm served as a secure meeting location precisely because it was so ordinary, so unlikely to draw attention. Your grandfather facilitated at least 3 critical meetings that we can identify from these records, meetings that directly influenced American policy during one of the most dangerous periods of the Cold War." The revelation left Mike speechless. The same fields he had walked thousands of times, worried over, fought to save from financial ruin. They had been the site of secret meetings that potentially helped prevent nuclear conflict. His grandfather, the practical farmer with soil-stained hands, had played a role in history that extended far beyond the boundaries of Pinewood Valley Farm. One of the specialists approached with another document. "Ma'am, we've identified what appears to be a personal journal, sealed in its own preservation container. Based on the labeling, it belongs to Mr. Johnston's grandfather. Director Martinez examined the small leather-bound book before turning to Mike. This appears to be your grandfather's personal record, Mr. Johnston. Given its nature, I believe it falls outside our classification parameters. It rightfully belongs to you. With hands that trembled slightly, Mike accepted the journal. The leather was still supple, perfectly preserved by the specialized container that had protected it for decades. Opening it carefully, he recognized his grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Neat, precise capital letters that had always seemed unusually formal for a farmer. The first entry was dated March 12, 1957. They came today, asked for my help, said the country needed ordinary men like me to do extraordinary things, said I couldn't tell Margaret or the boy, hardest decision I've ever made, but how could I refuse when they explained what's at stake? A farmer knows about planting seeds for future harvests. Perhaps this is the most important crop I'll ever tend, though I may never see it bear fruit. Mike closed the journal, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't fully name. Pride mixed with wonder, confusion with a deepening respect for the man who had shaped his earliest understanding of duty and purpose. Your grandfather was a remarkable man, Mr. Johnston, Director Martinez said quietly. Men like him, ordinary citizens who served in extraordinary ways without recognition or reward, they're the unsung heroes of American history. As the evening progressed, the team continued their methodical documentation of the container's contents. Mike sat on the tailgate of his truck, Cooper beside him, leafing carefully through his grandfather's journal by the light of a borrowed flashlight. Each entry provided another piece of a puzzle he had never known existed. Cryptic references to meetings, coded mentions of visitors, reflections on the weight of secrecy and the fear of global conflict that had defined that era. One entry from October 1962 stood out with particular clarity. 3 nights without sleep. The radio says nothing of substance, but I know from James that we stand at the edge of an abyss. Met the men from Moscow again yesterday. Information passed. Now we wait. Margaret asks why I keep checking the sky. How do I explain that I'm looking for contrails that would mean the end of everything? The farm has never felt more precious nor more fragile. Mike realized with a shock that his grandfather had been writing about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but from a perspective few Americans had shared, that of someone with direct knowledge of the behind-the-scenes negotiations. Sarah joined him, having returned after running home to change clothes and pack an overnight bag. Mike had insisted she was welcome to stay at the farmhouse as events unfolded, grateful for her steadying presence during the increasingly surreal situation. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she observed, sitting beside him. "In a way I have," Mike replied, carefully closing the journal. "The grandfather I thought I knew was real, but incomplete. There was this whole other dimension to him I never suspected." "Does it change how you feel about him?" Mike considered the question carefully. "Not in the way you might think. It makes me wonder what he carried all those years. The weight of those secrets, the responsibility. He never showed it, never complained, just woke up every day and worked this land like it was the only thing that mattered." "Maybe in some ways it was," Sarah suggested. "The farm gave him normality, purpose, something tangible to build and maintain, while he was involved with matters he couldn't control or even discuss." Agent Thornton approached, his expression indicating he had news to share. "Mr. Johnston, Director Martinez asked me to inform you that they've completed the initial documentation. The materials will be transported to a secure facility tonight for further analysis." "So that's it?" Mike asked. "You take everything and leave, and my farm goes back to being just a struggling piece of land with too many bills and not enough revenue?" The agent's expression softened slightly. "Actually, Director Martinez would like to speak with you about that. She's by the command center when you're ready. Mike found the director reviewing documents with several officials near one of the temporary structures. Upon seeing Mike approach, Martinez excused herself from the conversation. Mr. Johnston, first I want to thank you for your cooperation throughout this process. Discoveries like this are extremely rare, and the historical value of these materials cannot be overstated. I'm still trying to process everything, Mike admitted. It's a lot to take in. I understand, which brings me to something I'm authorized to discuss with you. Martinez gestured toward the farm at large. Your grandfather's service to this country went unrecognized during his lifetime, necessarily, so given the classified nature of his contributions. But now that these materials have been recovered and the operations details are being declassified, there's an opportunity to properly acknowledge that service. What are you suggesting? There's a specialized program within the government for recognizing and preserving sites of historical significance related to national security. Given what we've discovered about your grandfather's role and the meetings that took place here, Pinewood Valley Farm qualifies for designation as a historical site of national importance. Mike's mind raced as he considered the implications. What would that mean, exactly? It would mean preservation grants to maintain the property, potential development as an educational site about the civilian role in Cold War intelligence, and most immediately, resolution of any outstanding financial obligations currently threatening the property's future. The director's words struck Mike with almost physical force. After years of struggling against mounting debt and declining revenues, after facing the increasingly likely prospect of losing his family's land, was salvation really being offered through this unexpected historical connection? This isn't charity, Mr. Johnston, Martinez continued, seeming to sense Mike's hesitation. Your grandfather provided an invaluable service at considerable personal risk. The meetings that took place on this farm directly contributed to peaceful resolutions during extremely dangerous periods of the Cold War. Preserving this site and acknowledging its historical importance is simply the right thing to do. I'd still be able to live here, to farm the land? Absolutely. The designation would only enhance the property's status, not change its fundamental character or your rights as its owner. You'd work with historical preservation specialists to determine the best approach for both maintaining the farm's agricultural function and honoring its historical significance. As Mike stood there under the night sky, surrounded by government officials and specialized equipment, the farm that had been his family's legacy for generations suddenly seemed both familiar and utterly transformed. The same soil that had produced crops for decades had also nurtured a secret history he was only beginning to understand. Cooper pressed against his leg, as if sensing the momentous nature of the conversation. Mike reached down absently to scratch behind the dog's ears, reflecting that without his companion's persistence, none of this would have come to light. I need some time to think about all this, Mike said finally. Of course, Director Martinez replied. Take whatever time you need, but know that regardless of your decision about the historical designation, your grandfather's service will now be properly recognized in our nation's historical record. Harold Johnston will no longer be an unnamed footnote in Cold War history. As Mike walked back toward the farmhouse with Cooper at his side, he felt a strange sense of connection to the grandfather he thought he had known so well. He realized now that the qualities he had most admired in Harold Johnston, his reliability, his quiet strength, his unwavering dedication to his responsibilities, had expressed themselves not just in farming, but in service to his country in ways Mike was only beginning to understand. The night sky above the farm seemed vaster somehow, filled with stars that had witnessed decades of both ordinary and extraordinary history on this land. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new understandings, perhaps even a new purpose for Pinewood Valley Farm. But for tonight, Mike would read more of his grandfather's journal, reconnecting across time with the man who had carried the weight of history alongside the daily burdens of working the land. A man who had planted seeds meant to bear fruit long after he was gone. The sunrise painted the eastern sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink as Mike sat on his front porch, his grandfather's journal open in his lap. He had spent most of the night reading by lamplight, absorbing the carefully coded entries that documented Harold Johnston's extraordinary double life. Sleep had been impossible as he discovered the man behind the farmer, a patriot who had carried the weight of national security alongside the daily burdens of running a family farm. Cooper lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to observe the continued activity around the excavation site. The dog seemed unusually content this morning, as if satisfied that his persistent digging had fulfilled some greater purpose. In the clear light of dawn, Mike reached down to scratch behind the animal's ears. "You knew something important was there all along, didn't you?" he murmured. "Something meant to be found." The FBI's operation had shifted overnight from excavation to documentation and security. Most of the physical evidence had been removed, but a smaller team remained to complete site analysis and coordinate with historical preservation experts. The farm that had been on the brink of financial collapse just days before now hummed with purposeful activity, its historical significance elevating it from struggling agricultural land to a site of national importance. Director Martinez's offer of historical designation and the financial salvation it represented remained at the forefront of Mike's mind. But alongside practical considerations, he found himself wrestling with more profound questions about legacy, purpose, and the true meaning of his family's connection to this land. Sarah emerged from the farmhouse carrying 2 steaming mugs of fresh coffee. She had been an unwavering presence throughout the unfolding events, her practical support and thoughtful insights helping Mike navigate the rapidly changing circumstances. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed, handing him one of the mugs. "I haven't," Mike admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I've been reading my grandfather's journal. It's remarkable." "What have you learned?" Mike carefully closed the leather-bound book. "That he carried burdens I can't imagine, all while making sure no one, not even his wife or son, ever suspected that he hosted meetings here that potentially helped prevent nuclear war, that this farm served a purpose far beyond agriculture." Sarah settled into the chair beside him. "Does knowing this change how you feel about the farm, about your struggles to keep it?" "It changes everything." Mike gazed out at his land, seeing it with new eyes. "All these years I've been fighting to preserve what I thought was just a family legacy of farming. Now I realize I've been protecting something much more significant without even knowing it." "You protected it just as your grandfather did," Sarah pointed out. "Different threats, same commitment." Mike nodded, the parallel striking him deeply. Where his grandfather had safeguarded national secrets, he had battled economic forces and climate challenges, both of them determined to preserve the Johnston land for future generations. Agent Thornton approached the porch, his professional demeanor slightly relaxed after the intensity of the previous day's operations. "Good morning, Mr. Johnston. I hope we didn't disturb your rest too much." "I had plenty to think about anyway," Mike replied. "Any new developments?" "Several, actually. We've completed the preliminary analysis of the documentation recovered from the container. The historical significance exceeds our initial assessment." The agent hesitated, seemingly considering how much to share. "Director Martinez asked me to inform you that she's making arrangements for several high-ranking officials to visit the farm tomorrow. Apparently, the materials your grandfather protected are relevant to current diplomatic initiatives." The news caught Mike off guard. "Current initiatives? These documents are over 60 years old." History often remains relevant longer than we expect, Mr. Johnston. Some of the intelligence networks documented in these materials continued operating in various forms for decades. Their full history helps provide context for contemporary geopolitical relationships. Thornton handed Mike an official-looking envelope. Director Martinez also asked me to give you this. It's the formal proposal for historical designation, along with the associated financial considerations. She thought you might want to review it before tomorrow's meeting. As the agent returned to the command center, Mike opened the envelope and began reviewing its contents. The document outlined a comprehensive program for preserving Pinewood Valley Farm as a site of historical significance while maintaining its agricultural function. The financial terms were more generous than Mike had anticipated, enough to clear his outstanding debts and provide operating capital for years to come. Sarah leaned over to scan the proposal. "This is remarkable, Mike. It's everything you need to save the farm." "It's more than that," Mike replied, turning to a page detailing educational initiatives. "They want to establish a small museum in one of the outbuildings, create educational programs about civilian contributions to national security. They're talking about Pinewood Valley becoming a place where people come to learn about an aspect of history that's been largely hidden." "Your grandfather would be proud," Sarah said softly. "His service will finally be recognized and the farm will continue. But in a completely different way than I ever imagined." Mike closed the folder, his mind still processing the dramatic transformation of his circumstances. "Last week I was worried about making the next loan payment. Now I'm considering turning part of my farm into a historical site about Cold War intelligence operations." The irony wasn't lost on either of them, that salvation for the struggling farm had come not from agricultural innovation or financial restructuring, but from a secret buried in its soil for decades, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Throughout the day, Mike found himself alternating between practical discussions with the FBI team and periods of quiet reflection as he continued reading his grandfather's journal. Each entry provided another glimpse into Harold Johnston's extraordinary double life, revealing a man of profound courage and unwavering commitment. One entry from November 1962, written after the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis, particularly moved Mike. "The world doesn't know how close we came. They announced on the radio today that the crisis is over. People celebrated, then went back to their lives as if nothing happened. No one will ever know that 3 men sat at my kitchen table last month, passing information that helped pull us back from the edge. I should feel proud, but mostly I feel humble. A farmer understands that the most important work often goes unseen. Seeds germinating underground, roots strengthening before any green appears above the soil. Perhaps peace works the same way." By mid-afternoon, a new rhythm had established itself on the farm. The FBI continued their work with methodical efficiency, but their presence had become less intrusive, more collaborative. Mike found himself engaged in planning discussions rather than simply responding to events, his knowledge of the property proving valuable as they prepared for the next day's high-level visit. Sarah had taken on an unexpected role as liaison with the local community, fielding questions from curious neighbors while respecting the confidentiality restrictions Mike was still under. Her background in agricultural extension work had given her excellent communication skills that proved invaluable as speculation about the government presence at Pinewood Valley Farm intensified. As evening approached, Director Martinez returned from meetings in Washington, bringing with her several historical preservation specialists who would help determine how best to honor the farm's unique legacy. Mike gave them a tour of the property, sharing his knowledge of its agricultural history, while they provided insights into its historical significance from a national security perspective. "Your grandfather chose his hiding spot with remarkable Foresight, one specialist observed as they walked the southwestern section where Cooper had made his discovery. The soil composition, drainage patterns, and geological stability all contributed to the perfect preservation environment. Whether he understood the technical aspects or simply had a farmer's intuition for good ground, the result was ideal. He never did anything without careful thought, Mike replied, remembering his grandfather's methodical approach to every farm task. I always assumed it was just his farming style, but now I wonder if his intelligence work influenced his entire approach to life. The best operatives weren't the flashy risk-takers popular in fiction, Director Martinez commented. They were meticulous planners who understood patience and careful execution. Your grandfather's temperament was perfect for the role he played. As they completed the tour near the old barn, one of the specialists pointed to an unremarkable section of the eastern field. According to the documents we recovered, that area was used for emergency aerial supply drops during 2 critical periods. The natural depression created a perfect visual marker for low-flying aircraft while remaining invisible from the main road. Mike stared at the familiar field, trying to imagine nighttime aircraft dropping packages to his grandfather. I've plowed that section dozens of times without ever suspecting its history. That was precisely the intention, Martinez explained. The most effective historical sites were those that appeared utterly ordinary. Your grandfather's genius was maintaining that ordinariness while facilitating extraordinary operations. As darkness fell, Mike found himself drawn to the kitchen table where, according to his grandfather's journal, Soviet diplomats had once sat sharing critical intelligence that helped prevent nuclear conflict. He ran his hand across the worn, wooden surface, marveling at the history it had witnessed. Cooper settled at his feet, the dog's usual evening routine unaffected by the remarkable events of recent days. There was something comforting in the animal's steady presence, a reminder that despite the dramatic revelations, life continued in its essential patterns. Sarah joined him after helping prepare guest rooms for Director Martinez and her team, who would stay overnight in preparation for tomorrow's high-level meeting. She carried a pot of fresh coffee and 2 mugs, setting them on the historic table. "How are you holding up with all this?" she asked, studying Mike's expression with concern. "I'm still processing," he admitted. "Every hour brings some new revelation about my family or this farm. It's like discovering I've been living in a house with hidden rooms I never knew existed." "You've handled it remarkably well," Sarah observed, pouring coffee for both of them. "Not everyone could adapt so quickly to having their family history fundamentally rewritten." "I keep thinking about my father," Mike said, accepting the mug gratefully. "He inherited this farm without ever knowing what his own father had done here. He struggled with droughts and market fluctuations, never suspecting there was a classified operation buried in his soil." "Do you think your grandfather ever considered telling him the truth?" Mike shook his head. According to his journal, he took his oath of secrecy with absolute seriousness. He believed that protecting his family meant keeping them ignorant of his other role. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone would be. "A lonely burden to carry," Sarah mused. "That's what keeps hitting me," Mike agreed. All those years he carried this extraordinary secret while living an outwardly ordinary life. No recognition, no acknowledgement, just quiet service. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Agent Thornton entered, apologizing for the intrusion. "Mr. Johnston, we've received confirmation about tomorrow's visitors. The delegation will include the Deputy Director of National Intelligence, the Under-Secretary of State for European Affairs, and the Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee." The agent's tone conveyed the exceptional nature of such a gathering. "They're coming specifically because of what was found in your grandfather's container." What exactly did he preserve that's generating this level of interest? Mike asked. Agent Thornton glanced at Sarah, then back to Mike. Director Martinez has authorized me to share some additional context with you, given your security clearance for this operation. He took a seat at the kitchen table. The documents your grandfather protected included detailed information about intelligence networks that operated behind the Iron Curtain during the most dangerous periods of the Cold War. What makes them uniquely valuable is that they document successful back-channel negotiations that occurred outside official diplomatic channels. And this matters now because, Mike prompted, because several current diplomatic initiatives involve relationships and channels that evolved from those early networks. The complete historical context provides valuable precedent for current negotiators. Thornton leaned forward slightly. Mr. Johnston, history isn't just about documenting the past. It's about understanding the foundations upon which current events are built. Your grandfather preserved pieces of a historical puzzle that remained incomplete until now. After the agent departed, Mike sat in thoughtful silence, the enormity of his grandfather's contribution settling over him like a mantle. The quiet farmer who had taught him to respect the land had simultaneously been safeguarding information that shaped international relations across decades. I never truly understood legacy before, he said finally, looking up at Sarah. I always thought it was about preserving what we inherited, the land, the farming techniques, the family traditions. But my grandfather's legacy isn't just this physical farm. It's the impact of decisions he made, secrets he kept, principles he upheld. And now that legacy includes you, Rebecca pointed out. You protected this farm against different threats, kept it intact long enough for these discoveries to emerge. Without your persistence through financial hardship, this land might have been sold and developed years ago, the container never found. The perspective shift hit Mike with unexpected force. His years of struggle against mounting debt and declining agricultural conditions, which he had often viewed as failure, had actually been crucial to preserving something far more significant than he had realized. I never thought of it that way, he admitted. Sometimes we fulfill our purpose without recognizing it, Sarah said. Your grandfather never saw the full impact of his actions, yet he remained faithful to his mission. You did the same. Later, that night, unable to sleep despite physical exhaustion, Mike returned to the porch with his grandfather's journal and a small reading lamp. Cooper followed, settling on the step below him with a contented sigh. Under the vast canopy of stars, Mike turned to the final entries in the journal. The last dated entry was from 1978, nearly 2 decades after the beginning of Harold's involvement with Operation Guardian Echo. Visited today by James, first time in 5 years. He's retired now, like me, just an old man with memories few would believe. We walked the property, passing the spot without comment. The container remains undisturbed, as it should. He asked if I ever regretted my involvement, told him the truth, that serving a purpose greater than yourself is never cause for regret, even when the service remains unacknowledged. A farmer plants for harvests he may never see. This was no different. The entry confirmed what Mike had sensed throughout his reading, that his grandfather had found profound meaning in his dual service, neither expecting nor needing recognition for the extraordinary role he had played in history. The final, undated entry appeared to have been written when Harold Johnston knew his health was failing. The land will pass to Robert, and someday to his boy Michael. They will farm it honestly, as I have done. Perhaps someday they will learn its other purpose, though I cannot tell them. Until then, may they find satisfaction in the visible harvests, unaware of the invisible seeds I've helped plant and protect. A man could ask for no better legacy than to serve both land and country with equal devotion. I leave this record in hopes that someday, when secrecy is no longer necessary, they will understand that a simple farmer can make extraordinary contributions when called upon by history. Mike closed the journal gently, overcome with emotion. His grandfather had indeed been called upon by history and had answered with quiet courage. Now, decades later, Mike himself faced a similar turning point, a moment when his understanding of his place in the world was being fundamentally rewritten. The farm that had been a burden of financial worry just days before now represented something far more profound, a living connection to history, a tangible link between generations, of service that had expressed itself in different but equally meaningful ways. The land he had fought so hard to preserve would now be protected not just as a family legacy, but as a national treasure, its secret history finally acknowledged. As the night deepened, Mike found his perspective on his own struggles transforming. What had seemed like years of failure against insurmountable odds now revealed themselves as a necessary vigil, his stubborn persistence keeping the farm intact until its deeper purpose could emerge. Like his grandfather, he had served as a guardian of something more significant than he had realized. Cooper stirred at his feet, looking up with those intelligent eyes that had somehow sensed what humans had forgotten. Mike reached down to stroke the dog's head, grateful beyond words for the animal's persistence in uncovering what had been hidden. "You knew, didn't you?" he murmured. "You understood there was something important there, something that needed to be found." The dog's tail thumped against the porch step, a simple affirmation that needed no translation. The eastern horizon was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn when Director Martinez joined Mike on the porch, offering a freshly brewed cup of coffee. The government official had dispensed with her formal attire, dressed now in casual clothes that made her seem more approachable, more human. "I couldn't sleep either," Martinez asked, settling into the chair beside Mike. "Too much to process," Mike admitted. "I can imagine. It's not every day you discover your grandfather was involved in classified Cold War operations." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the farm gradually emerged from darkness, its familiar contours taking shape in the growing light. "I've been reading his journal," Mike said finally. "He never expected recognition, never sought it. He was content knowing his service mattered, even if nobody else ever knew." Martinez nodded thoughtfully. The most valuable operatives often share that quality, the ability to find meaning in service itself rather than in acknowledgement. Your grandfather understood something that many never grasp. True significance often lies in actions that remain unseen. Like farming, Mike observed, most of the important work happens underground, invisible to observers. It's the daily commitment that matters, not the recognition. Precisely, Martinez took a sip of her coffee, which makes today's events particularly fitting. After decades of necessary secrecy, your grandfather's contributions will finally be acknowledged at the highest levels. The operations he supported saved countless lives during a period when nuclear annihilation was a very real possibility. "What happens after today?" Mike asked, his thoughts turning to the practical implications of his farm's new status. "That depends largely on your decisions," Martinez replied. "The historical designation offers parameters, but within those, you have considerable latitude. This could remain primarily a working farm with modest historical elements, or it could become a more significant educational center. The choice is yours." "I keep thinking about something my grandfather wrote," Mike said, opening the journal to a passage he had marked. "He talked about serving both land and country with equal devotion. I want to honor that balance." Martinez nodded approvingly. "I believe we can create a model that preserves both aspects of your grandfather's legacy, the farmer and the patriot. They were never really separate for him after all. As full daylight spread across Pinewood Valley Farm, Mike felt a sense of purpose and clarity that had been absent during his years of financial struggle. The path forward wouldn't be without challenges, but it now held meaning that transcended mere economic survival. His grandfather had served quietly without recognition, protecting secrets that helped shape history. Mike's mission would be different, but no less significant: to preserve and share that legacy, to honor the invisible service that had occurred on this land, and to continue the Johnston tradition of stewardship in its newly expanded meaning. As the sun cleared the horizon, painting the farmland in golden light, Mike stood up, ready to prepare for the historic day ahead. Cooper jumped to his feet as well, alert and eager as always. "Come on, boy," Mike said, feeling a deep connection to the generations of Johnstons who had walked this land before him. "We've got work to do." The dog trotted happily beside him as they moved toward the barn, two unlikely heroes whose partnership had uncovered secrets buried for decades, changing not just their own lives, but adding a significant chapter to the nation's understanding of its own history. Behind them, Pinewood Valley Farm stretched out in the morning light, no longer just struggling agricultural land, but living history, its ordinary appearance concealing extraordinary significance. Like Harold Johnston himself, the farm had served multiple purposes with quiet dignity, its true importance finally recognized after decades of patient waiting. The day of the high-level government visit arrived with a clarity and stillness that seemed almost ceremonial. Mike had risen before dawn, driven by both anticipation and a sense of responsibility to prepare the farm for what would surely be one of its most significant days since his grandfather had first tilled this soil. Standing in the kitchen where Soviet diplomats had once passed crucial intelligence to American officials, Mike felt the weight of history pressing in around him. The ordinary farm table where he had eaten thousands of meals now revealed itself as a silent witness to events that had helped shape the course of the Cold War. How many other seemingly mundane objects and places held similar secrets there? Significance hidden beneath the veneer of everyday life? Cooper padded around the kitchen, his routine unchanged, despite the extraordinary circumstances unfolding around him. There was something reassuring in the dog's constancy, a reminder that even amid revelations that altered one's understanding of the past, life continued in its essential rhythms. "Big day ahead, boy," Mike said, filling Cooper's water bowl. The dog looked up at him with those intelligent eyes that had somehow sensed what humans had forgotten, what the earth had concealed for decades. Sarah arrived early, bringing freshly baked goods from the local bakery. She had embraced her unexpected role in these unfolding events with characteristic practicality, helping Mike navigate the intersection of government protocols and hospitality. "The whole town is buzzing with speculation," she reported, arranging muffins on a platter. "Black SUVs and government vehicles don't exactly blend in around here. People are saying everything from environmental contamination to buried treasure." "Not far off on the treasure part," Mike observed wryly, "just not the kind anyone expected." By mid-morning, Pinewood Valley Farm had transformed into something resembling a high-security government facility. Additional security personnel established checkpoints at the property boundaries, communications specialists set up secure channels, and protocol officers prepared the farmhouse for the distinguished visitors. Mike watched with a mixture of amazement and amusement as government efficiency overtook his usually quiet property. Director Martinez found Mike inspecting the southwestern field where Cooper had made his discovery. The area had been professionally landscaped overnight, with nothing to indicate the momentous excavation that had occurred just days before. Even the government's ability to erase its own tracks impressed Mike. "We've received confirmation that the delegation has departed Washington and should arrive within the hour," Martinez informed him. "I wanted to walk you through the general structure of the meeting," before they arrive. As they strolled across the property, Martinez outlined what Mike could expect: an initial briefing on the contents recovered from the container, discussion of the historical significance of Harold Johnston's contributions, and presentation of the preservation proposal for the farm. The chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee has taken a personal interest in this discovery, Martinez explained. She has a background in Cold War history and understands the significance of civilian partnerships during that era. Her support ensures that the historical designation will receive priority processing. "I still can't quite believe any of this is happening," Mike admitted. "A week ago, I was calculating how many more months I could hold off the bank before foreclosure. Now I'm preparing to host government officials discussing Cold War intelligence operations that my grandfather facilitated." "Life pivots in unexpected ways," Martinez observed. "Your grandfather understood that better than most. According to his journal, he was preparing for a routine planting season when he was first approached about Operation Guardian Echo." The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted their conversation. 3 black military helicopters appeared on the horizon, moving with purposeful precision toward the temporary landing zone established in the eastern field. The same field that, according to the recovered documents, had once received covert supply drops during the height of Cold War tensions. "Right on schedule," Martinez noted, checking her watch. "Shall we greet our guests?" As the helicopters touched down in perfect sequence, Mike felt a surge of emotion that caught him by surprise. Pride mingled with humility, awe with a deepening sense of connection to the grandfather whose extraordinary service was about to receive long overdue recognition. The delegation that emerged from the helicopters moved with the coordinated efficiency that characterized high-level government operations. Security personnel established a protective perimeter as the officials made their way toward where Mike and Martinez waited. Director Martinez made the introductions with practiced formality. Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Eleanor Chen. Undersecretary of State for European Affairs, James Reynolds. And Senator Catherine Hargrove, Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. "Mr. Johnston," Senator Hargrove said, extending her hand, "thank you for welcoming us to your farm. What your grandfather preserved here represents a significant piece of American history that has remained hidden for far too long." "I'm still processing it all myself," Mike admitted. "Until a few days ago, I had no idea about any of this." "That was precisely the intention," Undersecretary Reynolds noted. "The most effective operations of that era relied on absolute compartmentalization of information. Your grandfather's service remained classified for good reason. It helped preserve back-channel communications that proved crucial during several flashpoints of the Cold War." As they walked toward the farmhouse, Deputy Director Chen explained that the documents preserved in the container had already begun filling critical gaps in the historical record. The intelligence community operates on a need-to-know basis, which sometimes means that the full context of certain operations isn't assembled in one place. Your grandfather protected a complete operational record that provides critical insights into how certain diplomatic breakthroughs were actually achieved. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen table where Mike had taken thousands of ordinary meals had been transformed into a briefing area. Specialized equipment displayed secure images of selected documents recovered from the container, while historical analysts stood ready to provide context. "This is where it happened, isn't it?" Senator Hargrove asked, her hand resting on the back of one of the kitchen chairs. "According to the recovered documents, this very table hosted meetings that helped de-escalate the Cuban Missile Crisis." "Yes," Mike confirmed, still trying to reconcile this reality with his memories of everyday family life in this same space. My grandfather's journal mentioned 3 men sitting at this table in October 1962, passing information that pulled us back from the edge. Those men were delivering critical intelligence about Soviet missile deployments, Deputy Director Chen explained. Information that helped President Kennedy navigate one of the most dangerous moments in human history. Your grandfather provided not just the location, but the security and credibility that made the exchange possible. The briefing that followed outlined the extraordinary role Harold Johnston had played in multiple intelligence operations spanning nearly 2 decades. Maps displayed on secure tablets showed how the farm's remote location, yet reasonable proximity to Washington, had made it an ideal site for sensitive meetings that couldn't occur through official channels. Your grandfather's reputation for absolute integrity was as important as the physical location, Undersecretary Reynolds emphasized. Both American and Soviet operatives trusted him implicitly, an extraordinary achievement during an era defined by paranoia and suspicion. As the officials detailed specific operations facilitated by Harold Johnston, Mike's appreciation for his grandfather's courage deepened. The simple farmer who had taught him to respect the land had simultaneously been operating in a shadow world of international intrigue where mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. The most remarkable aspect, Senator Hargrove noted, was your grandfather's ability to maintain absolute normalcy. Neighbors, friends, even family never suspected his involvement in matters of national security. That level of compartmentalization requires extraordinary mental discipline. Cooper, who'd been resting quietly in the corner of the kitchen, suddenly rose and approached the table where the officials had spread out various documents. The dog's behavior drew curious glances from the government representatives. "This is Cooper," Mike explained. "He's the one who discovered the container in the first place, been digging at that spot for days before the storm finally exposed what he was after." Senator Hargrove regarded the dog with newfound interest. "Remarkable. Our technical specialists have theories about how certain animals can detect subtle electromagnetic signatures or material compounds that humans can't perceive. Perhaps there was something about the containment unit that registered with him. Or perhaps, Deputy Director Chen suggested with surprising openness, there are connections we don't fully understand scientifically. The documents indicate your grandfather spent considerable time with his own dogs in that area of the property. Maybe some memory persisted in the land itself." The conversation shifted to the future of Pinewood Valley Farm and the proposed historical designation. Director Martinez presented detailed plans for preserving the site's agricultural character while acknowledging its historical significance through carefully designed educational elements. "We envision Pinewood Valley Farm becoming a model for what we call living history, a place where the past remains connected to ongoing life rather than separated into a static museum," she explained, displaying architectural renderings on a tablet. "The agricultural operations would continue under your management, while select areas would be developed to tell the story of civilian contributions to national security." The financial aspects of the proposal exceeded even what Mike had hoped, for not just relief from his current debt, but sustainable funding that would ensure the farm's viability for generations to come. The government wasn't offering charity. They were investing in preserving a site of genuine historical importance. "Your grandfather protected American history," Senator Hargrove said. "Now it's our turn to protect his legacy, which includes both his intelligence service and this farm that provided his cover." After the formal briefing concluded, Mike led the delegation on a walking tour of the property. As they moved across the land he knew so intimately, he found himself seeing it through new eyes, not just as agricultural space, but as a stage where history had unfolded in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. at the southwestern corner. Where Cooper had made his discovery, Senator Hargrove paused, looking out over the rolling farmland that extended to the horizon. "There's something profoundly American about this story," she observed. "A simple farmer serving his country not through grand public gestures, but through quiet, steadfast commitment. Harold Johnston embodies values that transcend political divisions: integrity, sacrifice, humility. He never expected recognition," Mike said, remembering passages from his grandfather's journal. "Never sought it. He was content knowing his service mattered, even if nobody else ever knew." "The best kind of patriotism," Undersecretary Reynolds commented. "Service without the need for acknowledgement or reward." As they completed the tour near the old barn, Deputy Director Chen addressed the question that had been forming in Mike's mind throughout the day. "You're wondering why we're doing this now, why we're declassifying this history and acknowledging your grandfather's role after maintaining secrecy for so long." Mike nodded, grateful for her directness. "Two reasons," she explained. "First, enough time has passed that the operational details no longer compromise current security interests. But more importantly, we believe the American people need this story now. In an era of division and cynicism, your grandfather's example reminds us that ordinary citizens have always been the backbone of our nation's strength." "His service transcended politics," Senator Hargrove added. "He wasn't serving a party or an ideology. He was protecting principles that define us at our best. That's a message worth sharing, especially now." The delegation's visit concluded with a ceremony that would have embarrassed Harold Johnston, but which deeply moved his grandson. In the farmhouse kitchen, surrounded by the simple furnishings that had witnessed history, Senator Hargrove presented Mike with the Intelligence Community Civilian Service Medal, awarded posthumously to Harold Johnston for his contributions to national security. "This medal rarely goes to civilians," she explained, handing Mike the elegant case containing the decoration. "Even more rarely is it awarded publicly. But your grandfather's service deserves recognition, and his story deserves to be told." The medal gleamed in its case, a tangible symbol of service that had remained invisible for decades. Mike accepted it with hands that trembled slightly, overcome by the convergence of family pride and historical significance. "My grandfather wrote that a farmer plants for harvests he may never see," Mike said, finding his voice. "He understood that the most meaningful work often bears fruit long after the planting. I think he would be humbled by this recognition, but proud that his service is finally being acknowledged." After the delegation departed, the farm settled into an unusual quiet. The government teams remained to finalize site assessments and security protocols, but the intense activity of recent days had given way to more measured preparations for the farm's next chapter. Mike found himself drawn once again to the porch as evening approached, Cooper faithfully at his side. The familiar landscape spread before him, unchanged in its physical dimensions, yet transformed completely in its meaning. Sarah joined him, having returned after helping coordinate lunch for the visiting officials, her practical support throughout. The unfolding events had been invaluable, her perspective helping Mike navigate the intersection of his family's past and its newly revealed significance. "How are you processing all this?" She asked, settling into the chair beside him. "I'm still trying to reconcile the grandfather I knew with the man described in those briefings," Mike admitted. "The quiet farmer who taught me to respect the land was simultaneously involved in operations that helped prevent nuclear war." "Perhaps they weren't as different as you might think," Sarah suggested. "Both roles required patience, attention to detail, respect for natural processes, and absolute integrity. The same qualities that made him an excellent farmer made him valuable to intelligence operations." The observation struck Mike as profoundly insightful. His grandfather hadn't lived a double life so much as expressed the same core values in different contexts, one public, one secret, but both guided by the same unwavering principles. "What happens now?" Sarah asked after a comfortable silence. "Tomorrow we start planning the integration of historical elements with ongoing agricultural operations," Mike replied. "The preservation team believes we can maintain working farmland while developing educational exhibits about civilian contributions to national security." "Your grandfather would approve of that balance," Sarah observed. From his journal entries, it's clear he saw his farming and his intelligence work as complementary aspects of the same commitment: stewardship of land and of liberty. As darkness settled over Pinewood Valley Farm, Mike found himself contemplating the dual legacy he had inherited: agricultural tradition stretching back generations, and a newfound understanding of his family's service to national security. The financial salvation offered by historical designation solved his immediate problems, but the deeper gift was the expanded understanding of purpose and meaning. The weight that had pressed on him for years, the fear of being the Johnston who lost the family farm, had transformed into something altogether different: the responsibility of being the Johnston who would share his grandfather's extraordinary legacy with the world. That night, Mike slept more peacefully than he had in years, the crushing anxiety of impending financial ruin replaced by a clear sense of mission. When he woke just before dawn, he felt an unfamiliar lightness, an absence of the dread that had, for so long, been his first conscious emotion each day. Cooper was already at the door, eager for their morning routine. As they stepped onto the porch, the first hints of sunrise were just touching the eastern horizon, promising another clear day. They walked together toward the southwestern corner, where the discovery had begun, the dog trotting contentedly beside the man. The government teams had restored the area with remarkable precision. Only someone intimately familiar with the land would notice the subtle differences in soil composition and vegetation. "You changed everything, boy," Mike said, reaching down to scratch behind Cooper's ears. "Somehow you knew what was hidden here, what needed to be found." The dog looked up at him with what Mike could have sworn was satisfaction, then returned, his attention to the surrounding fields, alert as always to the subtle movements and scents that comprised his world. Standing there in the growing light, Mike reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed his circumstances. A simple dog persistent in his digging, a powerful storm that exposed what had been hidden, a metal container that connected past to present. Each link essential, each seemingly random, yet combining to reveal truths that had waited decades to emerge. His grandfather had written about seeds germinating underground, about the most important work often occurring unseen. Harold Johnston had planted seeds of history in this soil, trusting that someday, when the time was right, they would bear fruit. Through circumstances he could never have anticipated, Mike had become the harvester of that long-dormant crop. As the sun cleared the horizon, painting the farmland in golden light, Mike felt a profound sense of continuity with the generations of Johnstons who had worked this land before him. His grandfather had served both country and soil with equal devotion. Now Mike would honor that legacy by preserving both aspects, the working farm and the historical significance it had secretly contained. 6 months later, Pinewood Valley Farm welcomed its first official visitors to the newly established Center for Civilian Contributions to National Security. The modest exhibition space, created within a renovated outbuilding, told the story of Operation Guardian Echo and the crucial role ordinary citizens had played in Cold War intelligence operations. Harold Johnston's service featured prominently, his story presented as an example of quiet patriotism that had expressed itself through unwavering commitment to principles rather than public recognition. Visitors could stand in the very kitchen, where crucial Cold War meetings had occurred, could walk the fields where covert supply drops had supported intelligence networks operating behind the Iron Curtain. But Pinewood Valley Farm remained true to its agricultural roots as well. Under Mike's direction, and with guidance from Sarah's agricultural expertise, the farm had begun transitioning to sustainable methods that honored traditional practices, while incorporating modern innovations. The financial stability provided by the historical designation had freed Mike to focus on long-term stewardship rather than desperate survival. Cooper had achieved minor celebrity status among visitors, many of whom had read about the dog's role in discovering the container. He accepted the attention with dignified tolerance, still preferring to accompany Mike on daily farm operations rather than basking in human admiration. On a crisp autumn afternoon, as the season's first harvest was being completed, Director Martinez returned to Pinewood Valley Farm. She found Mike in the eastern field, working alongside the harvesting crew. "Quite a transformation since my last visit," Martinez observed, gesturing toward the beautifully restored barn that now housed both agricultural equipment and historical exhibits. "Balance was the key," Mike replied, honoring both aspects of my grandfather's legacy, the farmer and the patriot. They walked together toward a quiet spot overlooking the property, where a simple bench had been placed beneath a spreading maple tree. From this vantage point, visitors could appreciate both the historical site and the working farmland that surrounded it. "The program has exceeded expectations," Martinez reported. "The educational initiatives based on your grandfather's service have been implemented in schools across the country. His story resonates because it reminds people that extraordinary contribution often comes from seemingly ordinary lives." "He would have been embarrassed by the attention," Mike said with a smile, "but I think he would approve of how we've integrated the historical elements with ongoing agriculture. The land continues to produce while its story is shared. The perfect tribute to a man who served both country and soil." As if on cue, Cooper appeared from the nearby woods, trotting purposefully toward them. The dog had maintained his independence even as the farm had transformed around him, still patrolling the property with the same attentive awareness that had led him to the buried container. "The hero of the hour," Martinez observed as Cooper settled at Mike's feet. "Without him, none of this would have happened." Mike reached down to scratch his faithful companion behind the ears. He somehow knew what was hidden here, what needed to be found. "I've stopped trying to explain it and simply accepted that some connections transcend our understanding." As the afternoon light gilded the autumn landscape, Mike surveyed the farm that had been his burden and was now his mission. The land that had nearly broken him financially had ultimately revealed its deeper purpose, connecting him to a legacy far richer than he had imagined. Harold Johnston had written in his journal about serving purposes greater than himself, about planting seeds for harvests he might never see. His grandson now continued that tradition, preserving both the tangible farm and the intangible values it represented: stewardship, integrity, quiet service without expectation of recognition. In the distance, a group of school children listened attentively as Sarah explained how ordinary farmers had contributed to national security during the Cold War. Their faces reflected wonder and curiosity, absorbing a chapter of history that had remained hidden for decades. "My grandfather wrote that the most important work often goes unseen," Mike said, watching the next generation discover Harold Johnston's legacy. "I think he would find it fitting that his story is now helping young people understand that heroism often wears the most ordinary disguise." Cooper lifted his head suddenly, alert to something only he could sense. After a moment's consideration, the dog relaxed again, apparently satisfied that whatever had caught his attention posed no concern. Mike smiled at his companion's vigilance. Some things remained constant, even as the world transformed around. Them, the dog's instincts, the land's rhythms, the Johnston family's commitment to stewardship. These formed the continuous thread that connected past to present to future. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across fields that had witnessed both ordinary agriculture and extraordinary history, Mike felt a profound sense of peace. The farm that had nearly been lost had instead been found in a deeper, more meaningful way, rediscovered not just as agricultural land, but as living history, its ordinary appearance concealing extraordinary significance. Like his grandfather before him, Mike had become a guardian of both visible and invisible harvests, tending the soil that nourished crops and preserved secrets with equal care. The legacy that had once seemed limited to agricultural traditions had revealed itself to be something far more profound, a testament to how ordinary lives lived with integrity and purpose can shape history in ways that remain hidden until the moment when they most need to be found. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.